Okay, good. Welcome to the few and the proud and the active. This is Dan Whitman. This is our Africa series, which is an outgrowth of this larger thing that we're doing on international crisis management. And it is December 4th, 2024. Here come two more Kenyans. That's good. Now, what a privilege to have Mike Jobbins. Mike is a busy guy, and he travels a lot, and it's not easy to get hold of him. And I really admire. Let's see, I have to mute somebody. Yeah, there we go. I really admire Search for Common Ground, and I'm not going to try to describe it. I'm going to let you do that. And you offered a few moments ago, Mike, also to just give some general thoughts on this huge transition we're about to go through. Nobody knows exactly how it's going to play out, but of course, we're all curious will there be an Assistant Secretary for Africa, for example? Do we have any idea who that might be? I don't. But Mike, tell us about yourself, the types of training and curiosity that landed you in Search for Common Ground, and what is the methodology that you use in the field? I know you personally do a lot of work in Africa. Mike, over to you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks, Dan, for inviting me, and really great to be with you all. For those whose bandwidth allows it to turn on the cameras, or if people can introduce themselves in the chat, I'd love to also get to know you all as we have a conversation together. But like Dan said, my name is Mike Jobbins. I'm the Vice President for Search for Common Ground, the head of Global Affairs. So I'm responsible now for everything that this organization does in Washington, in Europe, at the UN and elsewhere. But I've been with Search for about 16 years, and overall, it's been a bit more than 20 years that I've been working on U.S.-Africa relations, and particularly as it relates to conflict-affected places. I started out, Dan, if you invite me to sort of share a bit of my background. I went to college thinking I would be a math major, and discovered very quickly that being good in math in the small town where I grew up was quite different from being good in math at a professional level. And so I grew up in a small place in the United States, had very little exposure to the world. But in those days, we had the course catalogs were alphabetical. And so African studies was the first thing in the alphabetical pages of the course catalog. I knew very little about Africa at that time. African affairs, history, connection to the US. And so I took a course, one and then another, and came to learn more about the continent, the dynamics, and especially my own focus has been primarily on US-Africa policy. I have the luxury today of working with fantastic colleagues across the continent who are very much focused on things that are happening in their societies. And my role has really been elevating and sharing that perspective here in Washington as well as elsewhere. I started with Search for Common Ground in Congo, and worked there leading efforts focused on conflict resolution in the context of refugees returning to the southern part of the country during the war. At different points, I led other programs in Congo and in the Great Lakes region, Sudan, the Sahel, and now I sort of work very closely with the colleagues who do that on the continent. Maybe I could share. So that's been my background. I'm always really stoked, really excited to speak with groups of young people interested in conflict and students interested in conflict resolution. Programs, share a little bit about organization, how people might want to get involved. I'm going to really have an open conversation. I can share a little bit, as Dan invited, about sort of who we are, what we do, maybe what we're looking for and excited about, or some of the new trends we're seeing and planning to work on in the year ahead as we sort of enter into that. So I'm happy to kick into that, Dan, but I don't know if this is sort of the time for that, or if you want to do some more introductions first.
I would like to hear your fascinating methodology, Mike,
Sure.
which I think John Marks kind
Yeah.
of invented and you have
Yeah.
developed. How do you go
Thanks.
into a village and search for common ground when there doesn't seem to be any?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So to start, the history of the organization, John Marks was our founder. He was he was an American diplomat who quit in frustration at the war in Vietnam at that point, and found that, um, and it required some fame or not, acclaim as a opposition human rights activist and so
Mhm.
forth. But found that his entire life was defined by what he was against, being against war, being against human rights abuses, rather than being what he was for building a better world, for searching for common ground. And that um, ethos has been at the core of what a lot of our organization does today. Um, that there's many, in a place where we work in Sudan, we work in Congo, we work in Mozambique, the Sahel, Nigeria, places experiencing violent conflict. And it's one of the core principles that we've held is that um, you can't build with what you don't have. And so rather than sort of looking at everything that's not working in a place like Central African Republic, there's no there's no safety, there's no security, there's no development, there's a humanitarian crisis. You can draw a paralyzing list of things that are going wrong in a place like the Central African Republic at a national level, or when confronted with the realities of the conflict in any particular place. But you can't build with what you don't have. So one of the things that we always do is we focus on what's the positive, what's going right in this place. So if the police and the army are corrupt or have low trust by the people, is there one unit, is there one individual captain who young people say, well, that's someone we can work with? How do you begin partnering with if all the school systems, the national school system's broken down, but students are meeting with, but students are coming together to learn under a tree. How do you support the villager, the citizens who are stepping up to be teachers? So one element is sort of focus on what you have and build with what you have. Another part of our method that came from John was that was a spirit of entrepreneurship. In any particular conflict, you never know what's going to work. You never know, and what works in one place may work very differently in another. But encouraging, and we make a big focus on encouraging working with social entrepreneurs, people who have a vision and are willing to try things. Because in very few conflict situations is it an incremental change process that gets you where you need to be. It's often sort of that step change. And then a third element is what we call it sort of a key people and more people approach, which means we do work, and that many might think of as classic conflict resolution. So we'll support mediators or negotiations efforts, dialogue committees um, throughout, throughout different places. But we'll often accompany that with some larger public activities efforts aimed at bringing in a bigger audience. And so there was a time when I started this organization, I was told we were the second largest audio producer in the world after the BBC. That's not the case anymore, but we still do produce about 400 hours of original radio programs across the continent. We have, I think, about 10 production studios. And understanding that the way people understand conflict profoundly shapes the way that political things at a grand level or at a community level unfold. The way Hutus and Tutsis see one another in Burundi is shaped by what they hear about one another on the radio. And so we've built, we've over the years developed a lot of really popular and practical media platforms. So, for example, we have a show that we syndicate in a lot of different countries that tells a story of a conflict or peace process through the eyes of a taxi driver. In Congo, we call it Mopila, the name of a taxi driver. And over the course of an episode, let's say he'll have people come in and out of his taxi with different perspectives on the conflict. Might have a parliamentarian come in and talk about, negotiations process. It's all fictional and all done in a very entertaining way. A woman comes, sits in the back of a taxi with a different view, and they have a conversation in the back of a taxi cab. And in that way, we try and humanize it, make it a little more entertaining, but also make it so that there's a wider public understanding. So I produce a lot of soap operas, a lot of game shows. We had in different places we have a soccer themed show for Americans. There's like a TV show called Ted Lasso that's about sort of a positive soccer team. We have it's a similar kind of show about a multi-ethnic soccer team that we've produced in probably about a dozen countries. So we'll do things that are aimed at also shaping the social attitudes and engaging the wider public on how conflict resolution processes unfold. And it's been really, really significant. And we evaluate our stuff robustly. And we did a survey that found that 3/4 of Boko Haram fighters in West Africa, so from the terror insurgency in northeastern Nigeria, and that 3/4 of Boko Haram fighters listen to our radio shows. And of those that defected or surrendered, more than half said that listening to these radio programs influenced their decision to defect. And so, all that to say, there is a role on the formal processes, but also the way that you actually engage people, including people who you might think are totally, out there, beyond the pale. But all of us wake up every day with a choice to make about how we want to spend our day, how we want to spend our lives, including those who are involved in militant groups as much as you or I. So that sort of mass engagement has always been something that we try to do. So we engage everyone, not just sort of the political types in the conference rooms and so forth.
I was going to ask how you measure your success, but wow, what a data point. 3/4 of Boko Haram listen to these are audios that are broadcast on radio, is that it?
Or the broadcast on radio and shared via WhatsApp. Yeah, broadcast on radio, shared via WhatsApp, shared via SD cards.
And half of them who have given up being in Boko Haram say that it was your broadcast that convinced them. Wow.
At least that it influenced them. That was part of their decision.
Wow. Well, gee, folks, I encourage everybody to unmute and get more about this. You told us that your audios and you do some videos, I think also, that they're enactments, they're fictional. How do you design these things? Do you have a method, or does it just come intuitively?
Yeah, I mean, so it's all designed locally. 98% of colleagues are sort of there, are from those communities, and many of them come from in all places they're multi-partial. So it's people reflecting the different components of a society, men, women, but also geographic, ethnic, political identities, and many of them come from creative backgrounds. For a long time, our head of sort of our media arm was a producer for I think it was Days of Our Lives, a very popular American Hollywood drama. She has spent 20 years producing TV shows in the US and wanted to change, do something more socially positive. So there has to be an artistic quality, and many of our people are artists. We have people on whose job title is like comedian. And so there has to be some artistic value and some creative value. And going back to the entrepreneurship attitude, Netflix has all of the data about what I've ever watched, and yet 9 times out of 10 they still get it wrong about what they're recommending to me, right? And like they have all the data about what everyone likes, and still they can't produce. They produce one, and you produce one hit out of every 10 things you produce. And so we embrace that kind of failure experimentation. We produce a lot of shows that we cancel after a season, and then you have a hit. You have a hit that Boko Haram people are listening to. You have a hit that's has 8 million people across Congo listening to a taxi cab, people discussing political issues in the back of a taxi cab. And so, and then you have shows. So part of it is also just that spirit of experimentation. Um, but um, and that has good artistic value, that embraces experimentation, and that means something. Something, in so many places, people are starved for positive content. If growing up in a place like Congo or CAR, people really respond in a lot of ways to the people respond to the kind of like the positive energy, and the role models that are created. Because if you're someone who's coming of age, so say you're someone who's coming of age in Congo, you may never have seen a police officer doing what she or he is supposed to do. Um, you haven't seen it in your life. It was, even if you're an old person, it was the Belgian colonial authorities, it was the Mabutist regime, it was the rebellions, and you've never actually seen a police department that functions. And so in some countries, we produce detective shows that tell a story. In South Sudan, we have a hit called Sergeant Esther that's about a female detective who's investigating crimes, trying to do the right thing, and it's extremely popular not only because um, it's entertaining, and it's mystery and detective shows are popular everywhere, but also because it depicts sort of how the world might be, how the world ought to be, and what a hero looks like. By doing that, it can be inspiring, and it also presents other kinds of role models, including aspire figures that you can aspire to that you might not see immediately in your community. And that's something that really resonates, particularly when people are faced with real injustice, real exploitation, abuse, corruption. That kind of content helps raise the expectations. And in those cases, one thing that really shocked us was we were doing the show. We were also doing a detective show in Congo, and we were worried that because we had characters who were corrupt policemen and things like that, so we were worried that the police would hate it. And on the opposite, it was the total opposite. The Congolese police loved it. They became some of our biggest fans because they all wanted to be the good guy. They all saw themselves being the good guy. And so it showed the realities of corrupt leaders, and there was no budget and all of those things. And they really appreciated that told a bit of their reality, but in a way that wasn't uniformly, that was nuanced.
Yeah. This is quite amazing. And I'm inferring that I know at the beginning, social media did not exist or hardly existed at the beginning of Search for Common Ground. And much of what you did was physically going into the field and actually meeting with people in villages. And then I guess you have transitioned over to using audiovisual and social media. What percentage now is it? And I'm guessing it's a far greater activity than what you used to do, which was physically meeting with people in villages. Do you do both still?
Yeah, we certainly do. We certainly do a lot. The in-person realities are still really important. We push out, a lot of the content that we'll produce. Like the Boko Haram example, we'll produce something for radio. They'll be broadcast still on radio, but also shared as audio clips on via that people can share on WhatsApp.
Yep.
And things like that. Those are something. So we'll use social media to share information. But it's really exciting. I think one of the things that's been exciting with the way technology has really taken off is just the ability to bring people together across space. And so, for example, in Mali, we work in a lot of communities that are physically separated from each other across different zones of control, where people can't leave, from one town or village to go to the next because it's too unsafe. And the ability to link people, or it's under one's controlled by the rebels, one's controlled by the army. And so the ability to use WhatsApp to link people is really great, because when you can't physically meet, you can do it via WhatsApp. One of the things that we're working on a lot now, and we have a partnership with Meta, the company that owns Facebook and WhatsApp, is what we call a community stewards approach. There's a phenomenon, I think, in almost every society, certainly across Africa, but also in my own country, in the United States, in Asia, in Europe, where many of us, all of us, participate in WhatsApp groups. Often they're organized alumni from a particular school, or young people from a particular town, or fans of a football club, or young or mothers groups that exist in every society. But when there's a political event that happens, or there's social tensions, often these kind of what they unfold also in these closed spaces, in these WhatsApp groups. They're often led by moderators who never signed up. If you're the moderator of a soccer fan, fans of Arsenal, fans of Chelsea, in Goma, you didn't sign up to lead a conversation on the Rwanda DRC conflict. And yet, the minute that erupts, you are now in this role of facilitating a conversation of 10, 20,000 people, perhaps, discussing this, putting things in, sharing misinformation, hate speech, incitement, rebel groups recruiting, people sharing, I need help with this or that, I'm fleeing this, does anyone know it's safe? And all of that starts showing up into groups that weren't created for that purpose, and where the moderators never asked for that. And you start getting both the extreme good and the extreme bad showing up in those kinds of conversations. And so we have a new focus, what we call community stewards. We're working in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Mali, Niger, to partner with people who lead those groups, and look at how we can, as well as outside Africa, in the United States and Sri Lanka and elsewhere, how you can train and support those people who lead these kinds of conversations as conflicts begin unfolding within their groups, in order to help that become more of a channel for constructive dialogue, with clear rules of the game, with clear discussions and agreements. And so that's one of the things we're really focused on, is not just moving beyond just what we're channeling out there, but how we can improve the quality of online conversations, particularly in the kinds of communities that WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, WeChat can create.
I'm guessing that everyone on this call, could be a community steward. And maybe later we can talk about how, if somebody on this call wanted to be involved with Search for Common Ground, what would be the steps? I think you mentioned something about training in order to be an effective community steward. We have an imbalance here in favor of Kenya. Kenya has come through really wonderfully, and we have others. We have on this call, we have one individual who's now a refugee from one country living in another country. We have two individuals from Ukraine, and and potentially we have a selection. Anyway, later maybe you can tell us about how does one become involved. Let me remind the group, some weeks ago, I talked about, and we actually have data on this, when people are living in stressful situations in countries that don't provide security, infrastructure, jobs, education, justice, we have found over and over again the wish that is always the primary wish, the main one is justice. And Mike mentioned justice a moment ago. It's curious. It is a universal, and it always comes up on top when we do survey. We, the U.S. government, we know that that's what people in stressful situations most want. When you say security, they see that as something temporary. Maybe I'll be okay for today, but see justice as a more permanent thing. I had some other, let's see. So I think, can you say what percentage of your time you spend on mass media or social media, and how much on physical, contact with people on the ground? It used to be very much the latter, and I gather it's
Mhm.
now the opposite. Does that sound right?
I think it depends in terms of me personally
Yeah, yeah.
or the organization.
You
Um,
and the organization. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
you are the organization.
Well, I have probably about 750 colleagues,
Um,
many of whom are more, are doing doing amazing work worldwide. And it depends a lot on the contexts in terms of what we're doing. I think, and you can't do anything. We don't. You can produce great media if you're Disney or or a media channel. Um, but if you're working for a particular social purpose, everything we do has some degree of in-person or at least direct engagement, whether you're facilitating a conversation on WhatsApp or in person. But everything we do has some degree of what we call key people. People need to come together and discuss, interact with each other, and figure out how to solve it and conflicts or bridge divides at a community level, at a political level. And so I would say maybe one third of our work is that. Another third is this media, is some sort of media engagement aimed at engaging a wider public. And then the third is around sort of supporting direct actions around in where there's been to take advantage of breakthroughs. Like the way that works, to give an example, there's a town in the Central African Republic called Boda, where there had been violence that pitted Christians against Muslims. And there'd been religious cleansing. Muslims had been chased in much of the country. This was one of the last places where there was a Muslim enclave and a Christian enclave separated by a road. And so people wouldn't frequent each other, but they hadn't been chased to become refugees outside the country or IDPs elsewhere. And so to desegregate, so we had a mission to desegregate the town, to help people sort of reintegrate across the road, as it were, so that people in the Muslims in the north could live with Christians in the south. And our main focus was the market, creating a market where everyone could shop. And so we did specific dialogues. So we had set up dispute resolution committees. We met with the Christian and Muslim religious leaders, we work with traditional leaders, the women, because women play a huge role in the market and much of the trade, to discuss, well, what would it take? How would we guarantee security? How would we make sure everyone feels safe? There's UN peacekeepers. What would their role be or not? So part of it was an explicit discussion and dialogue, but understanding 20 people can't decide for a town of 30,000. And so at the same time as we were doing that, we ran a radio, we were a partner with the radio station to run radio shows where you have religious leaders both talk about sort of peace, reconciliation, forgiveness in their religious tradition, take calls in from people from different perspectives about what they wanted to see in the town. And so there's a public engagement strategy that both created space for the religious leaders and political leaders to see that the public wanted, would be supportive of a desegregation, and to help the public, understand that this process was going on. So that was the media component, and then alongside that, the third component was direct action. So we supported Christian youth, Muslim youth, UN peacekeepers, to repaint the market, repair the space, make it so it looked physically different. And so it wasn't just sort of the talking, but when people showed up, there was a peace dividend and something physical that helped sort of mark. It was like this before, now it's like that now. So we'll do some things that physically help mark
Mhm.
a peace or conflict resolution
When
process.
this may sound esoteric, when you have an unhappy married couple who are arguing, and when the neighbor comes over to try to reason with them, the couple will tend to see the neighbor as a nuisance, as, please go away, we will solve it ourselves. So can you discuss, how do you come in as an outsider who was not part of that community? How
Yeah.
do you convince people that they have an interest in working with you?
Yeah. I mean, I think, we almost always go where we're asked to go. So we never say, hey, we're Search for Common Ground. We're here to help. Because, my colleagues in Central African Republic are Christians and Muslims themselves. Some of them are from that town. We have networks. There are days when, where, and we have physical offices in all of these places. And so we receive many, many more requests to get involved. Now requests sometimes will come from one community, the Christians may want us involved, but the Muslims don't, or so there's a trust building, or the people may want us involved, but the government is skeptical. So there's a trust building process to make sure that people understand, um, that there is a degree of support. Um, but now given, our role, and the name of our organization is Search for Common Ground, right? So that we do what it says on the tin. And so people who feel like there's an opportunity or a need to search for common ground will often reach out, we'll often reach out. And so that's a bit of how we get involved. But it's really important to make sure that everyone feels comfortable with us, and identifying what other people are doing. We don't want to double up on local efforts. And in a place like Boda, like I was describing earlier, we didn't come in and say, hey, we're Search for Common Ground. We're here to mediate this conflict. We're here, there are religious leaders, there's political leaders who have the trust of communities, who have some will to move things forward. So how do we support them? What do they need? Well, they need, um, and maybe the last thing is, every time I've worked with in these kinds of really tough settings, you're encountering people on the worst day of their lives. If you're, or the worst month of their lives, if you're a Muslim or Christian religious leader in this town, this is like the worst month of your time as being a religious leader in this town, trying to move it forward. And so sometimes people look, there are a lot of homegrown solutions, a lot of great will. And people are also looking, well, how did this happen in Nigeria when they dealt with this? What happened in the capital when people dealt with this? And so people are often do look to us to also just share experiences, not necessarily to replicate in their own context in the exact same cookie cutter way, but they are curious, to have some examples and ideas, and options of things that have worked elsewhere.
So the driving impetus really comes from them rather than from you. Yeah. Now you mentioned CAR, which let's just call it a failed state. I think we can say that. And either heavily in taken by the Russian Federation. We could almost call it a Russian enclave. I'm delighted that you're not political, but how does this factor in when you're in a country where the people have suddenly turned very hostile towards the outsiders that they used to deal with, obviously in Francophone Africa, and the
Yeah.
Sahel is the best example. Does this affect your work in any way when there are these political things in the air?
Yeah, it certainly does, and we certainly need to manage it. I think as it relates in Central African Republic, in the Sahel, in many parts of Africa, um, public frustration with the status quo. An 18-year-old kid in the Central African Republic, it's not only that you may be poor, but you're on a trend line to remain poor for your whole life. You may never have the chance to get enough money to get married, to have a house, to have a job with a salary, that's paid every month. And so there's a lot of frustration and anger in a general sense with the status quo, and with the trajectory of things, that emerged at a time when the country was getting a lot of assistance from France, from the U.S. France, of course, has its colonial baggage there as well, with from the United Nations. And so the sense that the status quo wasn't working triggered, was something that Russia tapped into and positioned itself as an alternative, not because people thought really carefully that you know, analyzed the Russian system of governance and analyzed the Russian security operations and appreciated, but more of a, this isn't working. Let's just try something. We need to do something else. And Russia really stepped into that role. And, we see this in many places. There was a poll that asked Haitians what they wanted to see. And a Russian military operation, a Russian was more trusted than US, UN, regional, whatever, security assistance. Not because they've have thought about it and appreciate a Russian security thing, but because it was seen as something just different. And it's become a sort of a way of just rejecting the status quo. And that's what and so some of the failures of UN peacekeeping in the Central African Republic triggered frustration, led the government to invite Russia in. And as they got in, they got really in a way that's really difficult for the government, for others to sort of separate from or contain. So for us, I think it does. I think what we do, and we're talking to the U.S. When we talk to the U.S. or others looking at the phenomenon, I think our approach is that, like Spinoza says, nature abhors a vacuum, and the problem isn't what's filling the vacuum. The problem is the vacuum in the first place. And so, our approach in the place like the Central African Republic is, well, how do we build security? How do we build society that functions, make a state beyond failed, that also reduces, that reduces the role for any international cooperation, for international security forces, but particularly, those that have a really checkered record.
That sounds very accurate. The rejection of the French in the Sahel, which has been dramatic and dramatically rapid. I guess it's the devil you don't know, which would be Russia. Imagining that the devil might be worse than, and we're already seeing signs of, we call it buyer's remorse in the Sahel. The regimes that came in militarily, but through coup, with later with the help of Russian military help, the people were ecstatic, and in the street, we've all seen the videos and the photos of people waving the Russian flag. Apparently, the delight has gone way down. Now, in case anybody has not seen this, the one Francophone country in the Sahel that did not turn hostile to France was Senegal. And the young, very smart young president of Senegal gave a speech last week, very moderate tone speech, saying, we're not trying to cut ties with France, but could you please remove your military base? Very interesting. Senegal is kind of in a middle ground. They haven't totally rejected France, but the emotional turning away from France seems to be spreading very, very quickly in their former colonies. Now, I am sure that people on this call have questions, and they wonder, and maybe they wonder, how do I get involved? I think I didn't realize the vast network. You have 750 people, and they're based in many countries, and you have offices. I knew you had some. I didn't realize that you had this very developed network, which certainly works in your favor. I asked the group on this call, what are your questions? Do you have any interest? And I would include our two colleagues in Ukraine, that they might have thoughts about how to become involved in this, or would the methodology work? I mean, the Ukraine conflict, we don't know, and I would ask Dmytro and Sergey. We know that the conflict is an international conflict, but we also know that there are tensions on the local level. There are some people who are very opposed even to the use of the Russian language, where their neighbors disagree. I don't know if this is something that would be a benefit to a country currently fighting for its existence against another country, but any community will have tensions. This is wonderful stuff, Mike. Let's see, Vivian, do you have what do you, Vivian? How would you turn this into something that could be collaborative with Africa Society? Do you see any points of contact for mutual benefit?
Well, I had questions before going to that part, because definitely the collaboration is an opportunity. But my question, you've been in Congo now for almost 2 decades, and is there and is the program ending? Is the program finishing? Because once you find common ground, isn't the purpose of the program to end? And where has it ended? And my second question is, how are you bringing those incredible skills that you've developed all over the world to the United States? I mean, we have a issue in this country itself. I mean, we have never really had a real reconciliation with our African American brothers and sisters, and now we have another conflict between parties. I mean, the tensions are palpable in the air, and I think what those conversations in the back of the taxi are really important things that can be done in the Uber here. That's adaptation
Fantastic,
to the.
fantastic, Vivian. Thank you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Happy to. I mean, I can speak to those two. I mean, they're excellent questions. I think they're very much sort of on our minds, and
well, yeah.
and I could. But do you want to see if are there other questions, or should I can respond to Vivian?
I want to give people the time, but I do not want to give them the option of not coming in. Guys, we need to hear from you. We know you're thinking about these things, but you promised at the very beginning to talk about this big transition we're about to go through. I think Vivian's second question refers to that. Her first question being, when do you declare success in a country? There's never absolute total success, I suppose. When do you decide time to move on to some other challenge?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would just say, right. And I think that's exactly right. Every society needs to be better at managing conflicts. Politics change, social dynamics change, technology changes. And so the need for sort of the ability to resolve conflicts is part of every human life. It's part of every society's life. And yet there's only a certain types of places where an international organization is best, an international nonprofit like us is best positioned to do that. And so, while the mission of bringing people together across dividing lines is relevant everywhere, our organization doesn't bring the same value everywhere. And so we plan as an organization in 10-year cycles. We tend to work for a generation or more in most places, but we do exit, and we call it sort of stopping a success. Like we do transition out. And so we've transitioned out of about 10 places where we saw ourselves, and in many cases, so that includes in Tunisia, Morocco, in Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, Madagascar, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea. In many cases, our colleagues have formed their own NGOs, often under the Common Ground name. So there's the Ifriqiya Center for Common Ground is our sort of Tunisia legacy organization, 100% independent from us, locally resourced, locally led, completely separate. Similarly, Tokotani Raisana, which means Center for Common Ground, but in the Malgache language, is the legacy organization. So we do support that legacy. And there are also places where maybe the work that we're doing is more logically taken up by the government or by an existing civil society group rather than sort of our own colleagues. But so that's how we look at it. And we look at it essentially, not necessarily is there a need, because the need is everywhere, but does our international nature, is that an asset or is that a liability for the work going ahead? And where's the liability, then that's when it makes sense to sort of wrap up our work and hand it over to someone or to empower sort of our colleagues to create something independent.
As you
Um,
approach the
yeah.
next
Mhm.
larger
Yeah.
question about the political transition in the US, you
Mhm.
mentioned nonprofits and government. In my observation, government does not have much success in this, at least the US government. Can you discuss what is the advantage that a nonprofit has that a government does not have? Why is it that your methodology works?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, yeah, I mean, I think one advantage we have is that you have the ability to talk to anyone because you don't have the legitimacy of government and you don't have the authority of government and in many ways the power of government. Um, it means you can talk to everyone. You can talk to people who don't trust the government. You can talk to people who do. You can talk to people who, in a place like Congo where there are armed groups. For us to meet with an armed group in Congo or the Central African Republic or Sudan, that confers no legitimacy on them because we're explicitly because we're not the government. Um, we and so in that way you can create your own narrative, and because you don't have the coercive powers of government, um, people who don't normally trust the government might trust you.
Mhm.
I think is probably the biggest difference.
I kind of meant foreign governments like EU,
Yeah,
United States, which I guess they kind of see maybe in the same way as they see their own
yeah,
government. Yeah, okay.
yeah. I think that's
Um,
right. Or yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is
Uh,
unfortunate. Now, Vivian's big question. Um,
yeah,
the dissension and the tensions within the US society, you're mainly dedicating your efforts to foreign countries. Um, you said at the beginning you might have some observations about this big transition we're going to go through. Nobody knows what's going to happen, but as an NGO, as a nonprofit, what's your thinking in terms of um, remaining durable, remaining effective? Um, you need to be funded somehow. Uh,
yeah,
are contributors going to be inhibited in any way by this sort of climate of saving money, and maybe less money being available? I'm sure you've been talking about this with your colleagues. Um,
yeah, yeah. Certainly have.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
And we have
Sure.
chats. We'll get to the chats, I
Yep.
promise. But
Okay.
address
Yeah.
this question.
Yeah, and I should say to Vivian also, I mean, I've been speaking mostly of our work internationally because of the audience. Um, but we do also work domestically. We were founded to work domestically, and that's been a portfolio that has continued. Although the international work has grown faster, today we still have a really robust team sort of sitting next to me, sitting in the conference room next to me, working on US issues and really actually on exactly the two issues that you pointed to. One is around political polarization and division across between the political parties or people who identify with the parties in the U.S. In our recent elections, we were we were the lead among civil society groups for preventing elections violence in the states of Pennsylvania and Texas. Other civil society groups had other states. We were sort of coordinating some of those platforms, and we'll continue to play leadership roles in those two states where we have offices, staff, and community connections. I mean, then the other push is really, the other real focus, as you pointed to, is really on sort of America's own history of race and reconciliation, and justice, and truth telling, which has been since our founding the other sort of core pillar of our work here in the States. There, our major focus is on Louisiana, just because again, community connections and ties and historical reasons. And that's work that we're definitely continuing. And here in the US, like in every society, depending on who you are, your own family's history, what you've been told in schools and things, people's understanding of the past can be really shaped based on who you are, where you're from, and so forth. I mean, arriving, there are efforts called sort of reconstruction, essentially re-examining and helping people arrive at a common understanding of sort of what happened in the US in the Civil War period when there's quite a lot of continuing repression and violence, that's often sort of overlooked or only partially shared in our history books. And so there's a lot of community engagement there in Louisiana, but everywhere our work is very local, and so those are sort of Louisiana, Texas, Pennsylvania are our focus states in the U.S.
We also
But
see,
it's often this. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the very concrete question of contributions, charitable contributions. We
Yeah.
think that there will be either legislation or White House policies which may
Yep.
reduce the advantage of making charitable contributions. This would threaten your revenue flow, both you and
Yep.
Debian, I guess. Have you
Yep.
is there any strategy? I guess I can't imagine that there would be a strategy, but is there one?
Yeah. I mean, I can share on our side. There's a number of different things that we're tracking that are proposed on the civic space issues here in the U.S. for groups to work internationally. We, in the things floating around, we're part of a number of the National Conference of Nonprofits, Council on Nonprofits, and a couple of the groups that do advocacy on laws, including the one that you're describing. There are also some efforts that might increase the ability of the government to suspend organizations accused of supporting terror on the basis of an accusation rather than a court decision, which opens the chance for a lot of spurious accusations, which would be a problem. And there are some other things that are being proposed right now. I think what we'd say is, right now these are proposals that we're hoping get and working in coalition to push back on, so that they don't become law and they don't become administrative guidance. I'm fairly optimistic, but we'll see. And one benefit in the U.S. is the nonprofit sector, from educational institutions to religious and faith-based institutions to international groups to human rights groups to there's a robust nonprofit sort of community with connections to every side of the political spectrum, and so far the notion that sort of what's used against me today will be used against you tomorrow is spirit that so far has sustained some of the operating space.
I would like to emphasize with everybody on the call, everybody knows there will be profound changes coming up. We don't know exactly what. And working in the US government will be a very different matter 6 months from now. But in the nonprofit sector, you keep your identity, you carry on, and there's really, in a funny way, there may not be job stability, but there's stability of identity, which any government can never really have because of the changes. We have two great questions. I invite Peterson and Baxter to take the mic, and if you'd rather, I can read your questions in the chat. Peterson Waweru in Nairobi asks, great work, wonderful topic. How can I become a policy analyst under your network? And which implies that I know you have different types of people. You have people who are out there in the community. You have audiovisual producers. You have social entrepreneurs. What about policy analysts? I think, what sorts of people can be of help to you?
Yeah, sure. So we do also have policy analyst positions. The way we work, career-wise, or the way we're structured organizationally is we exist at every function, from finance to program leadership to media to monitoring evaluation, like measuring if our programs work, to policy analysis, which is the question, exist at a global level. Any job that can that can work in country is based in country. Anything that can't be in country but should be in region is based in region, in a regional hub in Central and East Africa or West Africa or Europe or whatever. And then everything that makes sense to aggregate at a global level is global. And so for our policy. So we do have policy analysts. If their job is essentially to work with our people who are producing radio shows or leading mediation efforts. And they work with them with the question, what does the outside world need to know? What is this saying about the conflict trends that we need to make sure people in Washington or people in the Congolese case, people in Kinshasa or, Bamako in Mali or whatever. And so how do you translate what we're doing and seeing into what other people should be doing to sort of support peace efforts? So that's the role of a policy analyst with search. How do we influence other people's policies, governments, UN policy to support, the kinds of opportunities our programmatic colleagues see? And I encourage you, we advertise our positions. I'd encourage you to have a look at the website. Friend me on LinkedIn, and we can talk there as well. But I would I'd encourage having a look. We don't have a ton of those positions, but we do have some.
So if I were a Kenyan young professional, would I go to the local? Do you have? I guess you have a local office, or would I address my question to the Washington headquarters?
Could be to anyone. I mean, it depends, because those are positions that exist. So if it's a Kenya policy analyst, like looking at policy issues in Kenya, then that would be led by our Kenya team. But would be, with Search for Common Ground Kenya, where our office is in Mombasa. If it was sort of East Africa regional issues, then that would be, attached to our regional office. Or if it was sort of a global US, global policy issues on climate change and conflict or something like that, that would be attached to the Washington global headquarters, because that would be a global theme. And so you'll see those positions on our website advertised. They also are advertised on local job boards and things like that. They'll be advertised with which office they're sort of attached to. And the way we work then is sort of the global climate person works with an East Africa climate and conflict person, might work with an East Africa policy analyst, who in turn is working with the Kenyan and, Kenyan and South Sudanese and Tanzanian and so forth.
Let's say that people on this call who are interested, see what you can find on the internet. If you have any issues or you come to a dead end, please let me know, and I can ask Mike for advice on how to go forward.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, and honestly, you can also where our website is not the most. Our website is good at some things and bad at other things, and our job adverts are not the most clear. So definitely go with Professor Whitman, but also you can follow me on LinkedIn and message there.
In addition to what's on the website, a lot of time Search for Common Ground does two things. They advertise in the newspaper, both for our RFPs, requests for proposals on certain things, providing services, as well as for jobs. And I don't know this because I used to scour the internet for security opportunities for a large security firm. So.
And let's not rule out the idea of volunteering at some point. Short of a paid position, there may be opportunities. Please think of what you have in mind. Let me know if you're unable to find the answers. Now, Baxter Katz in Washington asks Haram, what motivates militants in these countries? And how are you able to convince them to give up fighting? You mentioned this astonishing statistic of 3/4 of them listen to your audios, and half of those who've surrendered say that listening to you is what convinced them. Well, how do you do that?
I mean, I think to take Boko Haram in particular, there's a number of people who. Everyone has their own story, and like all of us, every decision we make has multiple different factors, right? Like why there's not one reason I married my wife. There's not one reason that I went to the school, but there's a multiplicity of different factors that drive all of our decision making in life, including our decision to participate in violence or to join a group like that. the mix of factors include some degree of economic desperation for some people in some places. There were lending schemes that led people to join Boko Haram. Individuals would lend you money, you can't pay it back. You can do some degree of some form of like military service. Or other ways people were they saw economic opportunities. Some people worked with some people joined a large number of people joined out of anger, frustration, and injustice. The military killed my brother. I want to get back at them. Or just a sense that my life is going in the wrong direction. I want to try something new. I want to try some way of advancing, and often outreach people, religious, whether religious, often sort of religious leaders or people with a coloring of religion, offered people sort of a chance to be part of something bigger than yourself, which is very appealing to people who are young, desperate, and there's an ideology from, in being treated by the local government, by NGOs, by others, by your family members, maybe that treats you as worthless, to have someone come and say, hey, we need you. Hey, we need you. You're important. You're going to be an important part of our struggle. It's a really, powerful thing. Can be a really powerful thing. Be all you can be, join us kind of thing. And so there are a number of different elements. But often once people found themselves in the group, people didn't believe they had an option of leaving in a lot of ways. Regardless of what got people there, they didn't believe that they could have a life in a different way. Sometimes that's from the indoctrination from the groups. Sometimes it's because they've done horrible things. They know they've done horrible things. They wonder if anyone would ever accept them. Sometimes how you would surrender, how you would leave, what it would look like if you did, seemed like too impossible a mountain to climb. So those were the kinds of things that we tried to address in the radio programs, and also address that, like, and it's not, in the early days, often when we were working with governments, like the Nigerian government in this case, the instinct of most government communications efforts is like, young people are really angry and frustrated, and the government communications is like, don't worry, everything's fine. Like, don't be angry. Like, just get a job. And then, like, we have no jobs. Like, well, just work hard, go to school. Everything's fine, and nothing's. You're wrong to be worried, thinking that, and that's not really convincing. If anything, that just throws oil on the fire. And so we always approach it, whether it's in the radio shows or when we're actually just talking to people and saying, you're right to be angry. You're right to want more out of life. And this is not a great situation. This isn't a good situation to live in. And we completely, and yet what's the choice? How do you channel your anger? How do you channel your aspiration for more? How do you channel that? And actually there are other ways to channel that. You can be a good, that involve leaving an armed group. Mm-hmm. And that giving people that kind of attractive future, that doesn't also neglect or give a false sort of picture that the status quo is acceptable, but just that there's a different way to change the status quo for yourself.
That's a pretty nuanced approach. It's not simple. It's not simple, and it does require that you demonstrate and prove to people that you understand their situation. The governments normally fail to do that. That's a powerful point. Hitam, would you like to take the mic? And if not, Hitam is he lives in the area of Sudan. You mentioned at the beginning you had people in Sudan. How in the world does that work? Sudan at the moment is in complete turmoil. They're unable to get food from Port Sudan into the people who need it. And you're able to maintain an office in Sudan. This is remarkable. Tell us how you do that. And what do you think can be done with that particular conflict? It seems to be getting just worse and worse. And Hitam, if you'd like to take the mic, we invite you.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dr. Mike. situation in Sudan is getting worse every day. Due to two parties, they don't want to go to negotiation table. Also, they doesn't want to let the humanitarian assistant come in. So my question to Mike, is there any strategy we can implement to get to these parties to negotiation table? Because they declare that they don't have willing to go to negotiation.
Uh-huh.
And people are suffering. We
Yeah.
are part of this suffering. I feel it to Uganda here. The situation in Darfur is getting worse every day. The Zamzam Dam has been bombed. Is there any strategy to bring those people to table?
Yeah. Thank you, Hitam. Your audio was a little bit garbled, but I think we got the point. And huge challenge, Mike, right?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. It's difficult. We do continue to work in Sudan. Our work has historically been most active in the two areas, so sort of South Kordofan, Blue Nile State, and then also in Abyei, which has been in areas that are now deeply affected by the war, as everywhere in Sudan, but not having operating outside of Khartoum, operating outside of Darfur, which have seen sort of the highest levels of violence. It gave us some modicum, although there's the profound food insecurity and humanitarian crisis. But yeah, we have about 14 colleagues and supporting partners there. To Hitham's question, I mean, I think there's, it's absolutely shocking, deserves a greater degree of world attention and probably in greater degrees of pressure on the war belligerent parties and the people who support them. That's been the case for the past 18 months. And it's not clear to me. We certainly need continued outside-in pressure from outside the country on the belligerent parties and on those who support them. And at the same time, I think we need to consider, we also need sort of the inside, although that's outside pressure is needed. We need to continue that up, but it's not clear to me that will change the belligerent parties. That will come in the scale that will change the belligerent parties' role. And so the other element is sort of the inside up pressure, and that's where we have a greater degree of optimism. You do have, because you can't build what you don't have. You have efforts, as you really know, Hitham, in different parts of the country, people trying to negotiate lifting the blockade here or there, people trying to open markets, people negotiating to try and get the schools open, citizens working to sort of provide what assistance they can. And that social movement and public assistance, I think, is one of the better ways to also bring pressure to the armed group. So it's not all Sudanese, but it also can't be done exclusively from the outside world without the pressure from Sudanese civilians inside and outside the country, traditional leaders, women's groups, and others. But there's a long way to go, and it really does mean, and a huge opportunity or need for both the international diplomatic corps to bring pressure on the belligerent parties, but also to work in a really authentic way with Sudanese movements that have their own ways of accessing and influencing the armed groups.
Well, I applaud you for even trying, because FAO is unable to get through. The aid organizations can't even get out of Port Sudan to distribute aid. It's really very dire. We applaud you for giving it a try and for staying with it. I guess, oh, your profile link. Mike, you've inspired clearly a lot of interest. Your LinkedIn profile link, maybe you could
Yeah,
share that. And Vivian asked if you've ever worked for San Egidio. I'm not familiar with that.
Sant'Egidio. Mhm.
Egidio.
Wrong spelling,
Yeah.
Sate Judio.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know how to drop, because I'm on my phone. I don't know how to drop the link, but if you look me up, I'm Mike Jobbins on LinkedIn, MikeJobbins.
Okay.
Um, yeah. And then so yeah, please do look me up and add me. We do, Sant'Egidio is a wonderful organization. We do work with them in some places like the Central African Republic. I wish we worked with them more. They do great work in Mozambique. They're absolutely fantastic. And I would say, yeah, I would say that we know them. We're not always working in the same places. But they're a group I have enormous respect for, and I'd encourage everyone to also to work them out and to reach out with them. And where we are both in the same countries, in Nigeria and Burundi and Mozambique and CAR, we have a good cooperation and
So
kind of
it's
collaboration with them.
Egidio, Egidio, is that how it is?
Egidio.
Gidio, Egidio, Egidio.
Yeah.
Look,
So yeah.
anybody on this call, if you're trying to find Mike or Vivian or find it, I will take any of your. You all have my email. Let me know what you need, and I'll try to help. I think you have, by the way, you have inspired interest in Ukraine, Mike, and
Yeah.
Sergei Topal. I don't know if you have people on the ground there, but Sergey and others, and
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
please just
Yes.
have a look at search and what they're doing, Dmytro Arlovsky, and if this is of interest, I mean, it could be a career that is not evident. That's
That's
not you can't count on that, but consider it. I think you're all extremely well positioned, motivated, and trained to do this type of work. And I would be thrilled if this
Yeah.
opened up some doors for you. Mike, this has been really eye-opening. The group knows that the course that we do together is more about crisis management than conflict resolution, because conflict resolution is much harder. It's much harder, and there are fewer organizations doing it well. I think Search for Common Ground, I believe, is the one in the United States that has the longest history, the best record of results, and I encourage everybody to get to know Search for Common Ground. Mike, you've given us a face and a personality, and we're really grateful. Any other final observations or questions or remarks, including
Yeah.
from Mike?
Well, maybe I'd be happy to respond to Sergey's question. And we spoke a lot about Africa, which is where I spent a lot of my time. Ukraine is another of those places where, to Vivian's earlier question, where we ran programs in maybe 10, from the early 1990s up until 2008 in Ukraine, when at that point we felt that we're sort of beyond the era of conflict and transition. So there is a legacy organization there. But I do think, one of the lessons, there are many lessons, but I think one that Ukraine can, might take from a number of societies, but that might be applicable, is that, back to the Spinoza quote, nature abhors a vacuum, and the degree to which there's division within societies, that'll be exploited by outside actors and create a weaker state. And so the degree to which radio, whether it's radio, social media, communications, but everything that can be done to make Ukrainian society and all its diversity much stronger in this moment and in the years to come, is going to be really welcome and make it much more resilient to sort of future manipulations. I think we see, whether it's terror groups in Nigeria exploiting frustrations, whether it's groups, frankly, foreign groups exploiting the racial divisions in history in the U.S. To drive social tensions in our society. They didn't create them, but they exploit them. The terror groups didn't create corruption in the Nigerian state, but they exploit it. And so the degree to which the societies are stronger and media tools can help play that role, it makes things much less likely to be open to manipulation from abroad, and much more capable to kind of build the future we all aspire to.
Well, this is inspirational. Many of us, our ground state in dealing with these things is it's impossible. It cannot be done. And yet here you are doing it every day. You've got many, many thanks. You have admirers on this call, and I'm sure there will be some future contact. Yeah, that's the condition we live with, is audio feedback. Mike Jobbins, Search for Common Ground. Fantastic. We're really
Be in touch.
Wonderful. Back to work now. Back to work. We need you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.